At 7,280 meters on the world's 9th highest mountain, Elisabeth Revol made a decision that would haunt her forever. She left her climbing partner, Tomasz Mackiewicz, alone in a snow crevasse, knowing he would likely die. This wasn't cruelty. This wasn't cowardice. This was the only choice that might save them both. But it didn't. This is the story of two climbers who reached the summit of their dreams and why only one came home. Tomasz Mackiewicz was born in 1975 in a small Polish town called Żałoszyń. His childhood was spent by the Warta River, where he developed a deep love for nature and the wild. But by his teenage years, Tom's life had spiraled into heroin addiction. He lived on the streets, pale and skeletal, until his sister found him one winter evening and convinced him to enter rehabilitation. Recovery took years. Tom worked in labor programs, digging trenches and hauling bricks, slowly rebuilding his body and mind. When he finally got clean, he bought a one-way ticket to India. It was there, in the shadow of the Himalayas, that his life found new purpose. The mountains called to him like nothing else ever had. When he returned to Europe, he married Joanna and moved to Ireland, working as a mechanic. But his thoughts were always in the high peaks. In 2008, he met fellow climber Marek Klonowski at a party, and by morning, they had planned their first expedition together. Their target was Nanga Parbat, Pakistan's second highest mountain at 8,126 meters. Known as the Killer Mountain, it has a fatality rate of 22%. More importantly for Tom, it was one of only two 8,000ers that had never been climbed in winter. Tom's first attempt in 2010 was a disaster. He and Marek were underfunded and ill-equipped, carrying gear barely suitable for summer, let alone winter on one of the world's most dangerous peaks. They didn't make it far, but they returned the next winter, and the next, and the next. Each year, Tom climbed a little higher, 5,400 meters in 2011, 6,800 meters in 2012, 7,300 meters in 2013. Each time, storms and exhaustion turned them back. By 2015, Marek had reached his limit and stepped away from the mountain. But Tom couldn't let go. He spoke of Nanga Parbat as if it were alive, a spirit that haunted him. "This mountain is my addiction," he once said. It was more prophetic than he knew. After Marek left, Tom began climbing in alpine style, fast, light, and far more dangerous. No fixed camps, no porters, no supplemental oxygen. It was around this time he met Elisabeth Revol, a French alpinist who was his complete opposite. Where Tom was spontaneous and emotional, Elisabeth was precise and methodical. She avoided alcohol, followed a strict diet, and approached mountains with careful preparation. But Elisabeth had her own demons. In 2009, she had lost her climbing partner, Mountaineering, on Annapurna. He disappeared during their descent, and his body was never found. The trauma kept her away from big mountains for 4 years. When she returned to climbing in 2015, she joined Tom on Nanga Parbat. That winter, they reached 7,800 meters together, higher than Tom had ever been on the mountain. They could almost touch the summit. In 2016, they tried again and failed again, but each attempt forged a deeper trust between them. By December 2017, Tom had made 6 failed winter attempts on Nanga Parbat. For most climbers, that would be enough. For Tom, it was just the beginning of his 7th and final try. On December 23, 2017, Tom and Elisabeth arrived at base camp on the Diamir side of Nanga Parbat. The mountain was buried under snow and shadow, with temperatures already dropping to lethal levels. For Tom, this was attempt number 7. For Elisabeth, her 4th. Both knew the mountain might not give them another chance. They spent nearly a month acclimatizing and waiting for weather windows. Winter on Nanga Parbat is a battle against hurricane-force winds and temperatures that can drop to minus 40 degrees Celsius. The jet stream creates conditions so severe that most climbers consider winter attempts suicidal. On January 20th, 2018, they finally began their summit push. The climb was painfully slow. Every step at altitude felt like breathing through a straw. Ice crusted their goggles. The wind tore at their clothes with the force of a freight train. They followed a variation of the Messner route before joining the standard Kinshofer route higher up. On January 21st, they reached Camp 2 at 6,600 meters and found their tent from a previous attempt still intact. The next 2 days brought fierce winds that pinned them down, but on January 24th, they pushed higher to 7,300 meters, where they bivouacked in a crevasse. January 25th dawned with relatively calm conditions. They crossed a large plateau and began the final ascent to the summit pyramid. The climbing was technical and exhausting, but by late afternoon, they were close. At 5:15 p.m., Elisabeth used her satellite device to contact her husband in France. She was at 8,035 meters, just 90 meters below the summit. The sun was setting, painting the surrounding peaks in shades of gold and pink. It was late, dangerously late, but they were so close. At 6:15 p.m. on January 25, 2018, Elisabeth Revol became the first woman in history to stand atop Nanga Parbat in winter. Moments later, Tom joined her, finally achieving the goal that had consumed 8 years of his life. They had no time to celebrate. It was already dark and the temperature was plummeting. They took a few quick photos and immediately began their descent. But something was wrong with Tom. "I can't see you," he told Elisabeth, even though her headlamp was shining directly at him. "I can't see anything." Elisabeth's heart sank. She recognized the symptoms immediately. Tom was developing high-altitude cerebral edema, HACE, a deadly swelling of the brain caused by lack of oxygen. His speech was slurred, his movements uncoordinated. When he removed his face mask, blood stained the snow. They began descending together, but Tom's condition deteriorated rapidly. He stumbled, collapsed, couldn't stand. Elisabeth put his arm over her shoulder and helped him down, step by agonizing step. "I was pushing all the time," she later recalled. "I hated to do that. It was kind of cruel, but I had to do it to keep him moving." By the time they reached 7,280 meters, Tom could go no further. His breathing was labored, blood was seeping from his mouth and nose, and his extremities were white with severe frostbite. Elisabeth dug a crevasse in the snow and dragged him inside, wrapping her arms around him to shield him from the wind. At 11:10 p.m., she pulled out her satellite device and sent desperate messages to 3 people: her husband, Tom's wife Anna, and their friend Ludovic Giambiasi, who was coordinating from France. The message was stark. "Tomek need rescue soon. Frostbite and he didn't see nothing. Please manage something with Ali Soner as you can." Help was coming, they told her, but it would take time. Elisabeth spent the night in the crevasse, holding Tom, willing him to stay alive. But by morning, his condition had worsened. He was barely conscious, his breathing shallow and irregular. The rescue coordinators delivered devastating news. A helicopter might be able to reach Tom at 7,280 meters, but Elisabeth would need to descend to a lower altitude first. The aircraft couldn't carry 2 people from that height. Elisabeth faced an impossible choice: stay with Tom and likely watch both of them die, or leave him behind and hope the helicopter could save him later. "Listen," Elisabeth told Tom as she prepared to leave the crevasse. "The helicopter will arrive late afternoon. I must go down. They'll come to get you." She secured him in his sleeping bag, left him nearly all their remaining gear, and cut steps in the ice so he could climb out of the crevasse when the rescue arrived. Then she began her descent alone. Elisabeth had no ice axe, no belay device, no headlamp. She was climbing down one of the world's most technical mountain faces with nothing but her crampons and bare hands. She hadn't had water in over 50 hours and had been awake for more than 80. As she descended the Kinshofer route in darkness, Elisabeth began to hallucinate from exhaustion and altitude sickness. She imagined a woman offering her hot tea in exchange for one of her boots. In her delirium, Elisabeth actually removed her left boot and gave it away. She spent the next 5 hours climbing with only a sock on her left foot, developing severe frostbite. Meanwhile, a bureaucratic nightmare was unfolding in the valleys below. Tom had no rescue insurance, and someone needed to pay for the helicopter operation up front. The initial quote was $15,000, but as negotiations dragged on, the price escalated to $40,000, then $80,000. "It's a race against the clock when you set off a rescue," Elisabeth later said with anger. "It took, in fact, 48 hours for something to happen, so clearly I have a lot of anger inside of me. And Tomek could have been saved if it had been a real rescue carried out in time and organized." The delays weren't just about money. Pakistan's rescue system is controlled by the military, unlike Nepal's more efficient private operators. Askari Aviation, the only authorized rescue company, requires cash deposits before launching operations. While embassies negotiated and crowdfunding campaigns raised money, precious hours ticked away. Elisabeth continued her desperate descent, spending another night alone in a crevasse at 6,800 meters. She was hypothermic, frostbitten, and losing hope. When she heard helicopters overhead but saw them turn back due to high winds, she made a final decision to keep descending. But help was finally coming, from an unexpected source. 200 kilometers away, on K2, a Polish expedition was attempting the first winter ascent of the world's second highest mountain. When news of the crisis on Nanga Parbat reached them, expedition leader Krzysztof Wielicki faced an agonizing decision. His team was making good progress on what could be a historic first ascent worth millions in sponsorship and recognition. Wielicki asked his 13 climbers if anyone would be willing to abandon K2 to attempt a rescue. Every single hand went up. He chose 4 men: Denis Urubko, Adam Bielecki, Piotr Tomala, and Jarosław Botor. Urubko and Bielecki were among the world's elite high-altitude climbers, with dozens of 8,000er summits between them. More importantly, they were already acclimatized to extreme altitude. On January 27th, 2 helicopters finally lifted off from K2 base camp. The pilots performed a dangerous maneuver, landing at 4,800 meters on Nanga Parbat, higher than helicopters normally operate, and just 100 meters below Camp 1. It was an unprecedented risk that saved crucial hours. At 5:30 p.m., as darkness fell, Urubko and Bielecki began climbing. They had to cover 1,200 vertical meters to reach the area where Elisabeth was believed to be. In winter, at night, in temperatures of -31 degrees Celsius. They climbed without ropes, moving as fast as humanly possible. Their pace was extraordinary, 500 feet per hour in conditions that would challenge most climbers in daylight. They used old fixed ropes when they found them, despite the risk of the lines breaking after years of exposure to the elements. At 2 a.m. on January 28th, after 8 hours of climbing, Denis Urubko heard a faint voice in the darkness. Denis shouted into the storm. A weak reply came back. They had found her.
Elisabeth, nice to see you. Adam, I have her!
When Urubko and Bielecki reached Elisabeth at 6,100 meters, she was barely alive. She weighed only 45 kilograms, down from her normal weight. Her hands were blue with frostbite, and she was missing her left boot. She could barely speak and couldn't manipulate her climbing gear. "Where is Tomek?" Bielecki asked. Elisabeth's answer crushed their hopes. Tom was still at 7,280 meters, 1,200 meters higher up the mountain. He couldn't walk, couldn't see, and was bleeding from his mouth and nose. He had been alone in the crevasse for over 24 hours. The rescuers faced the same impossible choice Elisabeth had confronted. They could try to reach Tom, but that would mean leaving Elisabeth, who was barely clinging to life. In her condition, she wouldn't survive another night on the mountain. "We understood that if we left Elisabeth and went up for Tomas, she would die," Bielecki later explained, "and if we even reached Tomas, and he was still alive, we would not be able to get down Nanga Parbat's terrain with someone who cannot walk." The mathematics were brutal. Tom was at an altitude where helicopters couldn't operate. Even if they reached him alive, it would take at least 6 people to carry an incapacitated climber down the technical terrain. They were only 2, and they were already exhausted from their night climb. Denis Urubko made the call. "We chose to rescue Elisabeth." They spent 4 hours warming Elisabeth, giving her food and medicine, and preparing her for the descent. Then began the painstaking process of getting her down the mountain. With her frostbitten hands, she couldn't rappel safely, so they lowered her section by section while one of them descended alongside her. The descent took 18 hours. They took turns belaying Elisabeth down the steep Kinshover wall, then helped her walk across the snow slopes. Every 120 feet, they had to stop and build new anchor points. It was exhausting, technical work that required absolute precision. At 11:30 a.m. on January 28th, they finally reached the helicopter landing zone at 4,800 meters. Elisabeth was immediately flown to a hospital in Skardu, then to Islamabad, and finally to France for treatment of severe frostbite. The rescue was hailed as heroic, and it was, but it came at a cost that haunts everyone involved. Tomasz Mackiewicz remained where Elisabeth had left him, alone in a crevasse at 7,280 meters on Nanga Parbat. The mountain that had defined his life became his tomb. Elisabeth Revol spent 2 months in rehabilitation, fighting to save her frostbitten hands and feet. Against all odds, she avoided amputations and eventually returned to climbing. In May 2019, just over a year after the tragedy, she successfully climbed both Lhotse and Everest. But the psychological scars run deeper than the physical ones. "I was drowning in the bottomless depths of remorse, of guilt," she wrote in her memoir. "I was torn apart. The suffering caused by the frostbite on my toes and hands remained trivial compared to what I felt. A pierced heart, a wounded heart, a heart smashed to pieces." The rescue operation cost over $80,000, funded by the Polish and French governments, and a crowdfunding campaign that raised $187,000. The excess money was given to Tom's 3 children. Tom's body remains on Nanga Parbat, entombed in snow and ice at 7,280 meters. His death certificate, issued by Pakistani authorities, is dated January 30th, 2018. He was 43 years old. The climbing community grappled with difficult questions. Could Tom have been saved if the rescue had started sooner? Was the bureaucratic delay that cost precious hours a form of institutional murder? Elisabeth certainly thought so, and her anger at the system that failed them burns to this day. But perhaps the most haunting question is simpler. In a situation where every choice leads to death, what choice is right? Adam Bilecki, one of the rescuers, was offered France's highest civilian honor for his role in saving Elisabeth. He declined. "I think we did nothing extraordinary," he said. "Everybody would do it. It's the obligation of every climber to help others. It's the duty of every man." Elisabeth Revol left her partner to die on the mountain. The rescuers left him there too. But sometimes, in the thin air and brutal cold of the world's highest peaks, there are no good choices. There are only the choices you can live with. Tom Mackiewicz got his summit. He achieved the dream that had consumed 8 years of his life. But the mountain that gave him purpose also claimed him, as it has claimed so many others who dared to challenge its winter fury. Today, when climbers look up at Nanga Parbat's icy slopes, they see more than just rock and snow. They see a reminder that in the pursuit of our highest dreams, we sometimes pay the ultimate price. And sometimes, the people who love us most are forced to make choices that will haunt them forever. The Killer Mountain keeps its secrets, and it's dead.